quiet for a second.
Good evening. My name is David Richardson. Great privilege of representing House District 113 for the last 6 years, and now a congressional candidate in District 27. And on sea level rise in terms of the federal government, the first thing we need to do is recognize that we have a problem. So right now there's been the head stuck in the sand, sadly, for far too long. There needs to be an integrated approach between the federal government, the state government, the county government, and the local government. I live in Miami Beach, for example, and there's no way that Miami Beach is going to be able to build enough seawalls and afford it on their own. It has to be an integrated approach. And so things that I would be looking at are a possibility of a carbon tax and possibly a swap with some of the gasoline taxes that we are doing now. Also incentivizing innovation and the enhancement of solar, wind, and wave. I think the federal government should be providing incentives for entities to become involved in those types of things. And so those are the things that I would be working on first and foremost. And of course, getting the federal government back into the Paris Climate Accords. I'm happy to see that some of the states are doing that voluntarily and some of the cities around the country, but the federal government needs to step back into this. So thank you very much.
Demetries, please introduce yourself, the office you're seeking, and the answer to the question, what do you think are the most important solutions at the federal level for sea level rise?
Good evening, I'm Commander Demetries Grimes, U.S. Navy, retired. I was an aviator and diplomat, more than 25 years of service, 7 deployments, 100 combat missions. I'm running for the U.S. House in the 26th District. My opponent, Debbie Powell, is not here. I've been endorsed by the Democratic Environmental Caucus. And with respect to the priorities for the federal government, we need to prioritize the funding to the states that are going to help them become more resilient to deal with this issue in the future. It's up to the states to decide what those priorities are and to articulate them to us, and for us to get that money to the states. Also, with respect to destructive force recovery, which is near and dear to my district's heart, we need to streamline the funding reimbursement means to get the money back to the cities and the states, the cities and the counties and the states post-storm recovery, which in the 26th district, only 50% of Irma claims have been reimbursed to date. And then lastly, which is longer term, is we need to continue to incentivize and promote clean energy initiatives and transition from fossil fuels and the types of energy that is destroying our planet. And we can do that. That's the longer term solution.
Thank you, Commander. Matt, you're up.
Should we be standing?
If you like to.
You guys prefer for us to stand?
Stand if you like.
Stand? Stand. Okay. Stand. All right. My name is Matt Haggman. I'm running for the Democratic nomination for District 27 for the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm a former newspaper reporter. I was a journalist for 10 years, most of that time at the Miami Herald. And then the last 6 years was at Knight Foundation, where I launched a range of programs around stirring entrepreneurship and innovation across our community, which included efforts to stir new thinking around addressing sea level rise and climate change. Number one, I think, is we need to set an aggressive goal about where we're headed. To me, it should be set as a country, we should be setting a goal about by 2040 that we should be carbon neutral as a country. We have our economy powered by renewables. That is that the child born today, when they enter the workforce at 22 out of college, are entering an economy that is carbon neutral. I break this down really into 3 parts to think about how we address this. Number one, adaptation, right? And that's happening right now. Raising streets, pumps, seawalls, all of that. Miami Beach is going through that right now. Cities are isolated in this effort. The federal government needs to be part of that, providing funding to help cities across the country deal with the adaptation that's required right now. Number 2, planning. In terms of we're planning, no matter what we do, if we were to go carbon neutral tonight, sea levels are going to be rising. We need to be planning for that, and here in South Florida, we need to be the global leader. Number 3, I see I'm running out of time, so number 3 is, of course, this problem that ultimately, while sea levels will rise no matter what we do today, to limit the rise of sea levels, we need to make this transition to a carbon neutral economy and to an economy powered by renewables. And we need to be leading that effort and South Florida should be the one leading the way. And in doing that, not only is this
Time's up, yeah.
not only does this make us more resilient, we will create jobs.
Pass along the microphone, just to your right. Go ahead, hi, good evening.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Michael A. Hepburn. I'm running to become the next congressman here in the 27th Congressional District. Thank you for being at Adadi today. I'm also one of the co-founders of the Adadi Neighborhood Association, which is the boundary that you're in right now. So, good to see everybody. 4 things. 1, on the federal level, we need to increase the support and funding sources to our local cities and municipalities across the nation, right? Definitely here in Florida. So that is 1. 2, can we be more proactive about the planning of what sea level is? Can we actually elect people to understand the concept of climate change? Can we actually elect elected officials that do not take money from corporate PACs and corporations and FP&Ls and Big Sugar and other people like that, so you're not necessarily playing both sides of the game? That's 3. 4, I am a military brat in a sense, right? My grandfather, World War II, my dad was in the Army. He talked a lot about how the world was changing, and 10 years ago, he was talking about how military bases and coastal cities were struggling 10 years ago. We're still having those same conversations today. It's a military risk, it's a national threat, and we need to do something about it. And, I got 30 seconds, cool, so I keep going with it. The last piece is this. I call it brand new Congress. This whole concept of us doing stuff the same way that we've been doing the last 30, 20, 10 years needs to change. So I am running with a team of candidates all across this nation to push forth this policy and our ideas together. So there is one special thing that's different with me than everybody else here. I'm actually coming into Congress with the votes to get stuff done because I'm having a pre-formed caucus already. So when we win these primary elections throughout this nation, we are ready to go on day 1 compared to what the other person was saying on commercials. Thank you.
Michael, thank you very much. Please pass the mic along. Hi, good evening.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Adadi, and after serving 7 years in the United States Army, I will always stand for protecting America's future. I would like to point out that I am the only Republican candidate that made it here today, so just so you know, there are those of us who care. I'm also running against 8 other Republicans in this primary, so just keep that in mind when you make it out to the polls on this Monday. So as far as solutions, the biggest thing is for us to be proactive, not just at the federal level, but down from the state and the local levels as well. We can, in regards to infrastructure, we can require the plans. We can require projects that are receiving federal funding to have design plans in place that protect against flooding. We can also have incentives or grant programs for educational institutions. Like currently there's a class in Harvard that's conducting research on sea level rise in Miami. So if we have more innovations like that and more ideas that are coming from outside of our city, that can also help in regards to funding. And we also need to have more engagement with the private sector. Money just doesn't have to come from the federal government. It can come from the wealthiest of the wealthiest in our country as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner, good evening.
Hi, how are you? Good evening. Is this right? Just pull up. Don't start my timer yet.
Hi. This is a global problem. So the first thing you need to do is...
First, introduce yourself and the office
hi.
you're seeking.
Kristen, Rosen, Gonzalez. I'm running for this Congressional District 27. First and foremost, this is a global problem. It could displace hundreds of millions of people over the next 2, 3, 4 decades. The poorest nations will suffer the most. So we need to rejoin the Paris Agreement and begin to talk to other nations about how we're going to deal with this, because when we look at it regionally, we are going to have mass climate migration from places like Puerto Rico as we get these storms and they're coming toward us. In terms of adaptation and planning, Matt said, adapt and then plan. That's not how you do it. You plan and then you adapt. Because if you adapt and then you plan, you spend the money, and it's not the right way to go. What we have to do, and what nobody's going to like, is a mass risk assessment analysis. So we're going to have to bring in these large corporations that actually look at our entire state and actually the nation, and look at all of these coastal cities, and they're going to tell us, this is what we can save, this is what is going to become marshland, and that's going to be a very painful process for us to go through locally as a nation, but it's the reality. We're not going to be able to save it all, and we're doing this right now in Miami Beach. We're having And every time we're just about to do the risk assessment and analysis, we kind of cancel it because I don't think we want to get some bad news that we might get. So we need to do the planning. In the short term, we need to make sure that our tax dollars stay in each state. So whatever we're paying into tax funds, let's keep it in the state of Florida to mitigate for ourselves. And we have a lot of hard work to do. We can't sugarcoat this. This is the biggest problem I'm facing the state of Florida.
Thank you very much. Let me just keep the microphone. We'll start with you since it's down there, and then we'll move back the other way here. Let's start with an issue that is, frankly, on the agenda in Congress right now, which is the reauthorization of the National Flood Insurance Program. The state of Florida has more flood insurance policies than any other state in the nation. South Florida has more flood insurance policies than any other region in the state. When we talk about the flood insurance program nationally, we're talking about protecting people's homes in South Florida. We're talking about protecting their nest eggs in South Florida. Would you vote for the reauthorization of the National Flood Insurance Program? And would you advocate, if elected to Congress, any changes to the National Flood Insurance Program?
It's so interesting that you bring this up because I passed a resolution about a year ago saying we need to reauthorize this program, we need to maintain our subsidies, we need to make sure that we keep our dollars here in Florida, and nobody cared at the time. I did a press release, I passed the resolution unanimously, and it just seems like that's kind of far off. But we are right now about to switch to a risk-based analysis, and it's very interesting. A lot of people in South Florida think it's only affecting Miami-Dade, but FEMA was in the process of drawing all of our all of our flood maps, and the entire district, or the entire state, was basically going to become a flood zone until Donald Trump defunded that redrawing plan, probably because he owns property here. So he's bought us a couple of years, but we are all now in a flood zone. Of course, I'm going to vote to keep these subsidies, but the fact of the matter is, how much money? The flood insurance plan is $2 billion in debt, and we're probably going to switch to a market.
30 billion in counting.
Billion, and 2 billion,
Correct.
30 billion?
Oh, yeah.
So we have a serious issue, and the fact is, I gotta sit down. Okay, I
All right, thank you. So we'll move right along. Doctor, go ahead. Would you vote for the reauthorization of the National Flood Insurance Program? Any changes you'd advocate for?
So the National Flood Insurance Program was meant to reduce federal disaster payout, but instead it's incentivized more development into flood zones, which has been costing us more money. It's currently in debt about $24 billion, and they're currently borrowing money from our national treasury. So would I vote for this? It depends on what the reforms would be, because we need to learn how to budget properly. If this was a program that was sustainable economically and financially, not just for the nation, but for for South Florida as well, then it's something that I would vote for. But as it stands now, no.
So the current reauthorization sounds like if you were in Congress, you would vote against.
For the current one?
The current reauthorization, the current subsidies, the current plan.
I haven't looked at the current one, so I can't really give you a different answer.
So thank you. Go ahead, Michael. The reauthorization of the flood insurance program, any changes?
Yes, have no issues with the flood insurance program, but definitely would love to revamp it and then have a better allocation of funds, the mix that we have as far as who's paying into the flood insurance program, right? So that needs to change. When it comes down to allocation of funds, this is one of our biggest obstacles. We talk a very good game here in America about taxes. We actually pay a lot of money in taxes. We actually bring in a good amount of revenue, right? We spend almost $886 billion this upcoming fiscal year on military spending. It's what we are projecting to get ready to spend. But when I sit here and I talk about infrastructure improvements or flood insurance and other initiatives that we need, mitigation adaptation programs, we don't have any money for those. So I am not against the reauthorization of it, but it will definitely come with some caveats as far as one, finding more effective, sustainable funding sources. Two, exactly figuring out the percentages of how we pay out different assessments, the risk assessments that we take forward, but then also having a real conversation about overall, what are we doing to really prepare our coastal cities to proactively prepare for what's coming our way. And that's it.
Thank you. Matt?
So I would vote for the bill, but I think going forward, we need to begin preparing for a future where it will be risk adjusted. And because I think inevitably that's what's to come. When we have a program that is so deeply in debt, that's what's ahead of us. Now, as we think about that's what's ahead of us, we'll have to ease that transition. For some, so providing federal funding, so we ease that sticker shock. we have to think too. Go back to Andrew. Everyone thought that homeowner insurance rates would go up dramatically after that. It didn't happen. And why did that happen? Because we developed a plan. Just think about the South Florida Building Code, for example. We need this, and it goes back to having a plan in terms of how we're going to address this. If we can do that well, then we can deal with an environment as we move into one that's more risk-adjusted going forward.
Commander?
Yes, I agree. We do need to reauthorize the funding. And it's figures I read were 25 million, but Florida is the most severely impacted due to this issue. I mean, 23 of our 25 cities in the country that are at risk the most to sea rise are cities in Florida. So we do need to adjust. But I also agree with Matt that we need to be looking at we have the science and the data. And we need to be looking at as we reauthorize the building and structures that were impacted. We need to provide incentives to move people into areas that are not as at risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Yes, I would vote to reauthorize in the next cycle, but also I want to look carefully at the new risk analysis plans, and so I would have to study those because I'm concerned about this new risk analysis that's going to kick in 2020, where we're going to be doing different assessments within a flood map zone, and I want to make sure that homeowners are going to be treated fairly by those formulas. So I would reauthorize, but I want to look at those risk assessments. Thank you.
Just a little bit further on that. We would like to grandfather in like risk assessments now. I mean, give us
No.
I
I want to make sure that the plans that they have for the flood insurance program are going to be fair. The algorithms that they're going to be used, what are they going to use the measurements to differentiate between different homes, different apartment buildings that were within a flood map zone. That's what I'd like to look at.
Commissioner, go ahead.
I mean, what's the reality? If we switch to a market-based insurance
Is
plan.
that the light green on the microphone?
Yeah, it is.
Is it?
Hello?
There you go.
Hello?
Yeah.
On or off?
Go ahead and pass this one
Hello?
down.
You know, what's the other?
Yeah, strike two.
I'm
I
having
think this
microphone
one's gonna be
issues.
your
I'm
best.
sorry.
Here.
Hello?
Here.
Oh,
No, it's working. What's the other option that we have? I think we switched to risk-based analysis, 10 years ago? And everybody's flood insurance for like a brief moment went up tenfold. So what are we gonna do? Have
max defaults on mortgages and stuff. We're gonna have serious issues and
we're gonna have to speak with the banking industry too. But I thought a lot about this, and California does this because there's homes along the fault line and they have different risks too. So we have to look at the California models and see why are they able to get financing for their homes, and can we do the same?
it's gonna be a difficult time.
Michael, I'm gonna have you start with the next question with this microphone here. That's the one
All right,
that we
got
can
two
rely
now.
on. Yeah, test it. There you go. All right. So a couple of your compatriots up here have talked about a carbon tax, for instance. Do you support a carbon tax? If so, what are the broad shapes of that? Please spell that out about how that would work.
I am not against researching additional ways for us to bring in revenue, definitely if we are trying to combat carbon pollution, right? Now, when I have this conversation about a carbon tax, is it coming from most of you guys in here? Probably not. I am more focused on people that's not paying their fair share of taxes right now. I am more focused on corporations that's taking advantage of social service programs, right? And literally using taxes to help their employees live, right? But then they're not paying back into the system, and they're one of the main, folks polluting our earth. So I am definitely into investigating like what that would look like. But to be honest with you, right now, would it come from like working class, middle class Americans? I'm not there yet. I'm more focused on, can we have some real conversations about renewable energy, right? Can we have some real conversations about how we're going to literally invest in mass transit and literally create other options for people to get around our cities? Can we have some real conversations about not electing people to office that's not going to stand up and fight for your beliefs and the things that's going to make our country and our state and our cities better?
We'll do our best to circle back around the incentive side of things, because you mentioned that. Yeah, go ahead and over to the doctor there next. on this idea of a carbon tax. Doctor, your support? If so, why? If not, why not?
So, in regards to the carbon tax, while it may sound good that we have extra money that we can use towards different projects and stuff, what are the cost effects going to be for people who are in a current situation, who aren't able to afford to go green or go clean? Placing a burden on working families or families below the poverty line is not something that I would support. However, I do support looking for ways where we can reduce the carbon that is currently on our streets. There would just need to be more research that goes into this.
Can you give us examples of where you would look for that
Or,
reduction of carbon?
Requiring corporations that are producing these carbon-based products to, I guess, having them taxed in a certain way so that they're not producing as much, or requiring them to find another source of renewable energy to use more of that and less of the carbon so that our trees can be safer.
Commissioner, do you support for a carbon tax?
Yeah, I would like it to make it so expensive to burn fossil fuels that nobody's going to want to do it anymore and force some sort of transition. And we know that once you make a capital investment in green technologies, it pays off and it's much cheaper. And we can do it. I think that it's going to take a lot, you're going to have to elect a lot of Democrats to make it happen because we are so addicted to fossil fuels and we're burning good, clean coal right now. But I do think that as we move forward and elect a greener, more democratic Congress, I think you're going to see that we have no choice, right? It's making it impossible.
Representative Richardson, you first mentioned the carbon tax. I'll have you talk about your ideas.
Thank you. So the current bill that was just before Congress is really a tax swap, which would eliminate the federal gasoline and diesel taxes in exchange for a greenhouse gas emissions tax. So one of the things we have to acknowledge is that the amount of revenue that has been generated off of the federal gas and diesel tax, in addition to the state of Florida tax, has been going down because cars are more efficient, and so there's less money being raised right now. So I would be in favor of a carbon tax, but the rest of the story is how we would spend that money, because I think part of that money would need to be spent in incentivizing alternatives so we reduce the dependence on fossil fuels.
Right, and as I mentioned, we'll get to incentives here in a moment. Commander, the idea of a carbon tax.
Right, I agree. I mean, one of the dangers with taxes, and I just got my MBA from London Business School, we figured out many ways to pass the taxes to the working people, and the ones who usually bear the brunt of the taxes. So we need to figure out a way to, if we do promote some sort of carbon tax, that money is turned around to use as incentives to promote green and clean energy.
Do you support a carbon tax?
Yes.
Matt, carbon tax.
I support a carbon tax, although I think as we deal with this problem, I really see this as something where we need to think about how we harness innovation and entrepreneurship to grow our way up. And this is around having federal home loans for rooftop solar, having federal loans to cities to transition bus fleets to electric, and in terms of increasing tax subsidies to increase the transition for automobiles being electric. We need to make this transition as fast as we can. Furthermore, having federal support for having a distributed grid system, which is ultimately where we need to be, where each one of us is generators of electricity, where we envision a future, hopefully one that we can envision the next 10 to 15 years, where our roofs are generating energy, our cars are powered by the homes that are generating energy. That can be our future, but we have to make those hard decisions now.
Matt, you talked about an aggressive goal of being carbon neutral by 2040. You talked
Yeah.
about your support of the carbon tax with some of those ideas. Talk about the incentives and what your plans would be for incentives to be as specific as you can in regards to reaching that goal that you.
Sure, absolutely. Well, number one, I think we need to set moonshot goals, right? I mean, I think we need to set a goal, even if we're not quite sure how we're going to get there. But we do see countries today that have set 2040 and 2045 as goals that they're working to reach right now. If we see countries doing it, certainly America is the richest country in the world. We can hit that. In fact, I think here in South Florida, we should own this issue. We should be the global leader in making this transition. Now, what are the different ways the federal government can hasten this transition? And it's going to require federal funding. This ranges from chief resilience officers, funding in every city across our country as every community thinks about how to make this transition. This ranges from federal subsidies and tax supports to move to, so each one of us uses solar energy or renewables at different times to power our lifestyles. And then see them down to 10. That bell is something else. But in more than the thing is that we can harness on where market forces to make this transition. This can be one where this is not about sacrifice. This is about job creation and economic opportunity, along with protecting our environment and making us more resilient.
You do not forget the sound of that bell. Michael, talk to us about incentives. You mentioned those in relation to carbon tax. You want, if there is a carbon tax, for it to go toward incentives. What are some specific incentives that you would advocate for if elected to Congress?
The main incentive is to allow you to understand that you are a part of preserving our earth, this environment. To be very honest with you, I don't believe in the fact of patting somebody on the shoulder, definitely a company or corporation, and be like, I need to give you money or reduce your taxes for you to do the right thing. I'm not about that. I am about empowering, inspiring you guys, my constituents, to divest from companies that's not doing the right thing. I am about making sure that when I say we're pushing renewable energy, that I'm sitting on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, I have people on the Education and Workforce Committee, I have people in appropriations, so we're pushing our bills throughout Congress collectively on C-SPAN, MSNBC, Rachel Maddow Show, changing public opinion so I don't have to give out incentives. The whole concept is this. At the end of the day, we will need to cut at least carbon pollution, let's say 40, 50% in the next 10 years. That is a goal of mine, that is a goal of ours. I don't think I need an incentive for that. The concept is this: if you want to be in business, if you want to do the right thing for your fellow Americans, you need to get on board. If not, we will take our money and our time and our services elsewhere and we will be out of business, period.
Doctor, as specific as you can be, are there incentives that you would support if elected to Congress toward renewable energy or, for that matter, toward adaptation and mitigation to sea level rise threat it poses?
Right. So when it comes to protecting our economy and protecting our country from environmental threats, it is a shame that we have to offer incentives to get people more involved. However, competition is something that always gets people going. So some incentives, ideas that I can think of, is to have the cities or have the states involved in a competition. Whoever has the best renewable energy project gets the funding to support that project. Other incentives would go towards educational institutions, having more innovative research done, more ideas brought to our communities so that we have a better understanding of how to mitigate the factors that are currently pressing on our environment.
Great, thank you. Commissioner, specific incentives that you would support for sea level rise adaptation mitigation, or for that matter, on the opposite side, for addressing the carbon issue?
Okay, we already have tax credits for cars and solar. I think we could increase those. How can we incentivize these large monopoly type corporations like FPL to transition and build these solar farms that they really are resisting? And I think we just need to make it more attractive. I think you have to make the use of regular energy almost punishing, and that's why the tax is going to play such a large role, because otherwise they are never going to be encouraged to switch and make that capital investment. I believe they're already taxing us on our tax bill. I don't know what the number is at the state level. And they're not doing the proper investment. From a local standpoint, I mean, we're gonna ask for federal and state dollars, but we never get them right now. So I think once you elect people who understand the issue and we begin to create this research, we'll begin to get federal dollars. But the Army Corps of Engineers spent $300 in Louisiana. It was a failed plan. They've been burned several times. So I really think we don't have the proper research right now to understand the infrastructure needs. And the Army Corps of Engineers, they're replenishing beaches up and down the coast right now. It's extremely expensive. We're having to replenish more and more often. So where is all this money going to come from? We're going to have to be creative, and we're just going to have to tax those companies and make their business model, their 20th century business model, viable.
So beyond, just stick with this, will come down the line. Beyond the carbon tax, what are the other sources of new revenue that you would identify and target and advocate for as a member of Congress for your district to adapt and to mitigate to the challenge of sea level rise and flooding?
I think part of keeping our flood insurance dollars here and investing them in infrastructure is one of the largest parts. That's actually what my resolution that I passed in the city of Miami Beach said. Keep our tax dollars that we're spending on flood insurance here, and let's front load and invest them in the infrastructure that we're going to need. So that's one smart idea. It's something we're not doing right now.
So, for instance, the flood insurance premiums paid by homeowners in District 27, you would like to keep those premiums in District 27?
I'd like to keep the premiums in District 27 and also free them up so that we can adapt using those funds. Because the adaptation is expensive.
Elizabeth, how about for you? Talk to us about any sources of revenue that you would target or identify as a member of Congress to earmark for the challenge of sea level rise and flooding in your district.
I would definitely propose getting the private sector involved, having either more private funded projects or a combination of private and public funded projects. The money just doesn't have to all come from government. We have the private sector as well.
What would be the profit motive for the private sector to be involved with sea level rise adaptation or mitigation infrastructure projects? The profit motive for the private sector to be involved.
Business. Their motive would be to get more employees and to create more products that would sell their business.
Great, thank you. Michael?
Very good question. I was actually just writing down 4 things on what you know as far as where we're going to get this money from. 1, we are going to investigate implementing a financial tax, right? 2, I would like to eliminate corporate interest deductions. 3, I would like to tax corporations on overseas earnings. 4, I would like to stop increasing our military spending budget and stop going to war. If we do those 4 things, trust me, ladies and gents, we would have enough money to push our $4.6 trillion that I would like to spend over the next 10 years for infrastructure development and mass transit across this nation, across this district. We would have enough money to retrofit, rehab, build out new federal HUD apartment buildings, rent-owned homes. Man, so much. Literally speaking, the financial concept as far as what we do with our revenue is crazy. The money has always been there. How we spend it, how we allocate it, who we get it from needs to change. And I'm sorry, but I'm in this fight for working class people. So it's not coming from us.
Great, thank you, Michael. Matt, the sources of funding.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think this is really about priorities. I mean, we're a country with a more than $4 trillion annual budget. So it is about making this a priority that we must confront. And after all, as we talk about defense spending, it seems like as we just engaged in a double-digit % increase in defense spending, actually, Congress provided more than funding than the Defense Department actually requested in funding. The question about can we afford it never comes up.
Sure.
And yet in other areas it always comes up. Now, I also though want to pick up on something that we need to stir more entrepreneurship and innovation. I mean, why not have programs, loan forgiveness programs for those who go into areas around resilience? Why not have for startups that are focused on resilience? Why not have them actually go tax-free for 3 years to encourage more ideas, stirring more thinking around ways to combat sea level rise and climate change? I see I'm out of time.
Thank you, Matt. Commander, the sources of revenue, sources of funding.
I agree. We should be incentivizing both individuals, cities, and corporations, and we do it in the form of competitions. I ran a forward operating base, and we did that within the base because the Navy had challenged our bases to cut back on energy consumption, and we competed. We had each department and building compete, and it's really an effective way to do it. It promotes innovation, and it will help us achieve our goal of being cleaner in the future.
specific, so you're talking about competition there to reduce footprint, but what about?
Competition to reduce footprint, and then, of course, the source of revenue will come from, you can penalize the people who don't comply. And so you're gonna be driving people towards being more energy efficient, and then you're gonna be able to take in the revenues from those who choose not to.
Right. Representative?
Thank you. So just to comment on a couple of the statements I heard. Boycotting businesses historically does not work so well. I understand the personal desire and the personal satisfaction, but it doesn't get a lot of success. The other thing is I would not keep the tax revenue for the flood insurance, rather, not the tax revenue. I would not keep the flood insurance premiums at home, as was stated by one of the others. That is akin to self-insurance, and District 27 really can't afford to do that. The whole idea of insurance is to put in a larger pool so that everybody is protected, so that will not work. It would be great if you could keep the money if you never had a catastrophe, but we can't plan on that. So in terms of incentives, first of all, I think the federal government should share in funding of projects. So for example, enhancing stormwater systems that need to be enhanced because of the sea level rise, building sea walls, all those types of water projects. I think the federal government should participate where there is a share by the local and state government. And then what I would do is also incentivize individuals and businesses for innovation. And the third thing I would do is give federal grant money for innovation to come up with new technologies.
Representative, just hold on to the microphone. Next question from the audience I'll address to you to begin with. Do you believe that the federal government should hold climate polluters accountable for the costs of climate, and would you consider suing for climate liability fossil fuel companies and others that have contributed to climate change?
So I absolutely believe that people should be held accountable for their actions. One thing that we would have to do is come up with a very objective way for determining whether or not someone is accountable. So we would have to have clear measurements. And then I think that we could pass laws to hold those people to be accountable, and if they violate those laws, then we sue them.
So pass new laws, not...
We would have to pass, first of all, you can't hold someone accountable if they're not violating the law, right? So if we believe that something should be in place, then we pass a new law, and then if they violate that, if they're not holding to the new law, then that forms the basis, a foundation for reforming the lawsuit. Yep.
Commander?
Agreed. We need to make sure that our laws and our standards are clear, and we hold people accountable.
Matt?
Yes, absolutely. We absolutely need to hold polluters accountable. But again, the theme that I want to come back to is that I think in addressing this problem, this is something that can be a win-win-win. Well, in terms of creating the world that we want to live in, one that is built and powered on renewables. We can achieve that, protecting our environment, making us more resilient, but also expanding opportunity and growing jobs. And South Florida should be the place more than any other where this is happening. The model around the world where groups are coming here, seeing how a community is adapting, planning, and pushing this transition to one powered by renewables. Along the way, of course, we have to be punishing polluters, but I worry that we get off and focusing on being punitive instead of focusing on the goal of what we can be over the next 2 decades.
I'm with Matt on that one. Renewable energy, definitely here in South Florida, this should be like our bread and butter, right? We should literally be leading the charge on how we create new economies, how we literally within the next 10 years build out a whole new infrastructure that's from our higher education system to our high schools, to different fellowships, to different micro grants that we can do. I mean, there's so much we can do around this sector. Now, when it comes down to folks that are violating what I call like climate injustices, right? Then yes, they need to be punished. We need to pass legislation to make sure that happens. But even on the federal level, we need to apply pressure on the state level to the attorney generals and the governors and the state representatives and state senators to make sure that they are doing their part as well. I think one of the biggest things that we are missing when it comes down to leadership is people that's willing to use their political will to get stuff done, right? We have a whole lot of folks in office right now. But when you look at the concept of who they're actually working for and what they're willing to lose for it, it's a totally different ballgame. So until you actually elect people that's not so concerned about becoming re-elected, but actually concerned about doing the right thing, then a lot of stuff will change, and it doesn't take not one policy. Elect the right folks, like you, and then you actually have better policy on the back end.
The question was in regards to punishing polluters and suing those that have contributed to climate change. Would you support such action?
It is a possibility as long as these laws that are introduced aren't infringing on anyone's constitutional rights and are proven to be beneficial to the environment, the economy, and the equity of our neighborhoods, and it isn't a detriment to the individuals who are doing it and a benefit for the corporations who are involved.
The lawsuits aren't a detriment to those individuals? Is that what you're?
Yes, like if we're suing the individuals, but
Right.
like they're buying products from the corporations, that's what's contributing to their use of polluting the environment.
There was a window between 1979 and 1989, and all of the oil and gas and fossil fuel companies know this, where they could have stopped burning fossil fuels, and it could climate and the sea level rise issue could have been reversed. It has been ignored. It is just as bad as tobacco. They are responsible. This is one of the largest crimes ever committed against humanity globally, and somebody needs to be held accountable. And let me tell you, they have a lot of money. We should sue them. Get the money. It's so funny you asked that question, because when you started asking about funding, I was like, we should sue those companies and get them to pay for this, because they're really responsible for it. And I guarantee you we will get a large settlement, and we can use that to distribute among small municipalities and states across the country to at least begin to help us with this very difficult adaptation process.
Let me ask about the intersection of sea level rise and public health. Sea level rise can be contributed by higher sea temperatures, higher climate temperatures contributing to spread of diseases. We've seen that with the Zika outbreak, for instance, in 2016, the public health scare around there. So Commissioner, we'll start with you again. What do you think needs to be done at the federal level in order to protect public health and our economies as we are dealing with climate change?
It is so difficult. A toddler went swimming this past last week, right, off of Key Biscayne and got all sorts of diseases. So what we're seeing is this heating up of water. It's Al Gore's inconvenient truth that's actually happening. We're seeing the forest fires. We're seeing these horrible insects. We're seeing the heating up of our waters. We have these algal blooms. What can we do? I think we're going to need to begin. What's going on? Where is the EPA? Where are they? They're not regulating anything. Even at a local level, we're not doing the regulations that we need to. We're going to need to really begin to get strict. But there's nothing we can do about our water heating up, can we? I mean, we're seeing these temperature increases, but there is stuff that we can do. The EPA has to get stronger with agriculture, because all of these nutrients, just recently we had a large sargasso bloom off the coast of Miami Beach. It cost us millions of dollars to clean up. But when I asked our environmental department where it was coming from, here's what they said. They said it's coming from runoff in the Mississippi that's like slowly making its way down. So we're getting cow dung fertilizers, it's making its way south into our tributaries, and how many more nutrients can our water supplies take? The federal government's gonna have to be responsible, and we're gonna have to begin to regulate the agricultural industry, and that is going to be a very difficult transition for all of us.
Elizabeth, what do you think needs to be done in regards to protecting public health in our economies?
So, the great thing about being a member of Congress is that the ideas don't only have to come from up here. They can come from anyone who has a vested interest in American prosperity. Regarding public health, I can't tell you, I can't give you a direct answer because I'm not a medical doctor. I wouldn't know, but anyone who has that expertise and has ideas that we can use to help with the public health issues that occur with sea level rising, you can contact your members of Congress and give them your ideas and hold them accountable if they're not listening to you.
Thank you. Michael, intersection of public health.
Cool. So I was writing down 3. 1, Ms. Rosen Gonzalez brought up a very good point. We we need to protect the EPA. But more than protect the EPA, we need to protect access to their endangerment findings and actually fully fund all the solutions that the EPA already has on the table that under President Obama, we had access to and was trying to make some headway to, but now under 45, totally different ballgame. 2, any future federal funding tied to any infrastructure development in this district, across this state, across this nation, if it's not tied to sea level rise, proactive plans, or flooding plans, or anything related to climate issues, you will not receive a federal dime. That needs to be a mandate from all congressional members. 3, I personally would love to become the face of HUD. What do I mean by that? Every HUD housing complex that I have in this district, I've been to. And the injustice, the facility shape, the concept that we are not even prepared to deal with minor rainstorms in our HUD facilities that the federal government funds is a shame. So from this point forward, what I will definitely do as your congressman is to make sure every HUD property that we have in the 27th Congressional District is brought up to code, and from this point forward is ready for a 21st century economy and a 21st century living environment, because right now, most of our HUD places look like prisons, and that is not cool, because my taxes pay for that, and I'm not okay with that.
Thank you.
This requires government investment. Government investment in the Center for Disease Control, government funding into research and public health. And we went through Zika here in South Florida. Government funding is required to address this with Zika, the return or something else we haven't even yet imagined. But I can't help but where this takes me ultimately is thinking about our healthcare system in the U.S. Is that ultimately as we think about the long list of challenges that we have. Sea level rise, of course, is at the top of the list, but so is our healthcare system. And as a member of Congress, I would be fighting for Medicare for all to establish a universal healthcare system so that all have access to healthcare. Last point, unrelated, that I would just urge us all to think about, see how close we're getting. This is that think about climate gentrification. Is that think about the next time we have a hurricane that goes through and that an area that's on higher ground is wiped away, it's a low-income area. What happens? We see the high-rise, high-end developers go in and build there. We can't let that become our future.
I also support funded healthcare for all, and we can find a solution to that. But going back to this question, this goes back to being resilient, right? And so the CDC and Health and Human Services have a role to play in partnering with us as we promote the funding that's required to ensure that our infrastructure is resilient to prevent these different health risks that will come from sea rise, which Florida is at most at risk of. So, and we're seeing it right here with just some basic infrastructure projects that need to be taken care of immediately with respect to Lake Okeechobee and the dike, and and making sure that the agricultural industry and Big Sugar and others are not using our waterways as their wastewater dumping grounds.
Thank you. Representative, this intersection of public health.
Sure, the question is on the intersection of public health and sea level rise. So clearly we are seeing rise in temperatures and so forth. And the Zika was one example. So let me tell you one of the things that I did at the governor. The governor had a roundtable discussion here when the Zika outbreak hit. And I asked him to take a look at giving the Department of Health, state of Florida, small grants. Oftentimes what happens with medical research is the federal government issues very large dollar grants, $1 million, $2 million, and so forth. But what I learned is that if we give companies $50,000 grants, $60,000, $100,000 grants, they can gather enough information to then apply and qualify for a $1 million grant. And so the governor did look at that, and we did do some of that for Zika studies. And so I would extend that to the federal government to have some of these smaller grants that will provide innovation. And then the other thing is, from the first day of my campaign, I have supported Medicare for All, not using any fancy words like access or options or anything. I'm supporting the House Resolution 676, which is before Congress right now, and more than 120 sitting members of Congress are supporting, and I absolutely support that bill. Thank you.
Matt mentioned climate regentrification of refugees, or however we want to refer to it here, as part of your plan that you would advocate for in Washington to protect your district from climate change impacts, how do you plan on involving communities in decision-making that would be required, including those communities that are underserved or are at particular economic risk? Representative, we'll start with you since the microphone happens to be in front of you.
Sure. So one of the things that I've seen over the 6 years that I've been serving is more and more community interest groups getting involved with taking a leading position on innovation. So, for example, just the cleanup projects and so forth. I went out on a plastic bag cleanup about 4 years ago. That was a completely volunteer organization, and I got educated on plastic bags, and that motivated me to file a bill in Tallahassee and try to promote that issue and raise more awareness. So one thing that can be done is giving small grants to some of those types of community projects to further that conversation.
I agree. That's a great way to incentivize creating a culture of environmental stewardship, and and it begins with individuals and then the communities and sharing the best practices. And so we're not using the technologies that we have, or we're just beginning to figure out how we can all, as individuals and communities, share our best practices and promote this culture of environmental stewardship.
Well, during this campaign, I've often said that the best ideas come from the community, not the candidates. And I think this is a place where that certainly holds true again. When I was at Knight Foundation, we launched a program called the Singularity Global Impact Challenge here in Miami, where we asked the community for the best ideas around ways to address sea level rise, to stir new thinking about how we do this, and how each one of us take ownership of this. That this is not top-down, this is not something that government can figure out, this is something that all of us together must take ownership of. And so from a government level, providing funding, creating different design competitions, which were mentioned earlier, to stir new thinking and understand that we're all in this together. Certainly for our campaign, we're trying to run a campaign meeting people where they are, understanding the problems that they're trying to solve. Just this week, we knocked on our 40,000th door in the district. That same sort of approach, I think, is what's required here, engagement and engagement.
Let's see, a couple things. One is to continue to not run a campaign, right? To build a movement. So one of the first things I'm going to do, she's still here, trying to recruit her to be our chief resiliency officer, is to have one part of our administration. And one of the target goals for that is to incorporate two things. One, to build public-private partnerships throughout the district to make sure that our constituents have the resources financially, but more on the knowledge piece to get stuff done without passing a bill or a policy. But then two, to incorporate something called Hepburn Good Energy. I got that Hepburn Good Energy initiative. So we have 245 precincts. Within every precinct in this district, my job is to create a fellowship program for all of our constituents to make sure that they are on top level when it comes down to information related to climate change, how we're going to do mitigation efforts, how we're going to adapt our infrastructure, and then bring in that knowledge, that resource from the people that I am serving. So that is definitely one of the projects, is to make sure that I am very hands-on with our community, both in DC, but most likely, to be honest with you, I will be flying home every Friday to be here in my district to make sure that we are pushing forward together, because this is not a campaign, this is a movement.
Not only is it important to work together with elected officials, because you need enough votes to pass your funding bill, but it's also important to work with state officials and local officials as well. And this is not just a Republican, Democrat, or independent issue. This is an issue that faces the entire community. So it's important to work across party lines, to work beyond our differences, to find solutions to the problems in our community. We also need to host town halls, get the opinions of the residents that are currently facing these situations, find out what are the problems, if the solutions that we're proposing are going to work, if the current projects are working, and what can we do further down the road to help with these issues.
So one of my biggest worries is, as all of you know, over the past 10 years, you have paid into a transit fund, right? 1/2 penny on every dollar that you spend has gone to mass transit, and where are we in mass transit? and we might not for another 5 years. Now what I'm seeing across communities locally is we're beginning to bond. We're bonding money for sea level rise. The city of Miami, $200 million. Miami Beach has spent $200 million. We're going to bond another $300 million right now. My big fear is that the county bonds this money, and then we don't spend it correctly. We can't afford to do a sea level rise, but we did with transit. So number one, we're going to have to make sure that we have a really great plan. If we present this plan to the federal government, we have to get it funded. But I think that sea level rise is really a national security issue. And I think that what we need to do is create this multidisciplinary team and beef up the Army Corps of Engineers because I've already, we have that agency, and what we need to do now is make it better because they're going to have to go in across communities and solve these very, very large infrastructural problems. And that's one way we can do it with military spending. I think Mr. Hepburn said we have so much money already spent on the military that we spend it on the Army Corps of Engineers.
Ladies and gentlemen, some of your candidates for District 26 and 27 here for the congressional.